Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. We're going to quickly break down what went wrong, maybe a couple of things that went right, in the 21-17 Citrus Bowl loss to Illinois on Tuesday. Hope everyone's having a good New Year. Happy 2025 to those that celebrate the passing of time. And we'll also look a little bit ahead to 2025 and kind of what this team might look like with quite a few, and this is something that you wrote a lot about in the post game, quite a few defections just from time running out, mostly on defense. For a group that's been here a really long time and unfortunately ended their career with a loss. Let's break down a little bit about what we saw in the game. Obviously, South Carolina had a chance throughout. They were the first to score, went up 3-0. Kind of went back and forth from there. And ultimately, the game basically ended when Lenore Sellers, with a little pressure in his face, was not able to flick it out there to Joshua Simon in the end zone on a fourth down. That ended in a turnover on downs. A few plays later, Illinois kind of puts the nail in the coffin with a big run from McCray. Can't think of his first name right now. Josh McCray. There you go. To me, and where I want to start here, the story of the game, you go 2 for 4 in the red zone, and really only score one touchdown in 4 red zone trips. So despite the fact that you outgain Illinois in total yardage, 390 to 357, despite the fact that Lenore Sellers has a pretty good day passing, 71% completion percentage, 260 yards, a touchdown, 144 rating, was able to make some things happen with his legs, although I think Illinois did a good job game plan wise of taking that aspect away from him. How did you see, I guess, the narrative of this playing out and what went wrong for South Carolina down the stretch?
Yeah, I never want to read too much into bowl games. I just think they're. I thought Shane had a very apt quote before the game, actually, about how they're kind of like game ones because it's just such a long layoff before, and you kind of got to treat it like a week one almost, coming off an off season. That being said, I thought, you mentioned there that Illinois did a good job keying on Lenore Sellers in the running game. I just thought it was very noticeable how much South Carolina struggled with the quarterback run and some of the pieces of the offense in general without Rocket Sanders. And I'm sure we'll talk about that when we talk a little bit more about 2025. But the threat of Lenora Sellers and the zone read and the mobility and all of that, it's just harder to do when the defense is keying on Oscar Attaway or Jawarn Howell compared to Rocket Sanders. So I thought not having Rocket took away some of what Lenoris does well. And then you kind of work backwards from there about what the problems were on offense. And I thought your receivers just couldn't get a lot of separation. I thought Illinois' corners did a good job. There was the one play to Josh Simon over the top that Lenoris doesn't hit him. And there was one where he does hit Delvon Campbell to get some separation, but kind of underthrows it, and Campbell only gets down to like the 20 instead of scoring a touchdown, which it's funny you think about that, and just maybe we can transition. That entire brouhaha with Beamer and Bielema only happens because South Carolina's in the red zone and the Illinois player gets hurt after that throw, where if Sellers hits Delvon Campbell when he's wide open and leads him on, it's a touchdown, and that drive never happens down there anyway. So that's kind of weird how things happen. But, it's disappointing for South Carolina. I don't think it takes away anything from the season. TJ Sanders had an exact quote about that post-game. But it is a disappointing way to end the year, and a game you feel like you probably were the better team and just made one or two less plays than your opponent.
Yeah, so you started to talk a little bit about missing Rocket Sanders. I think also you saw a difference on defense without Kyle Kennard as far as the ability to disrupt. Weren't as many QB pressures, weren't as many tackle for losses, those early down impact plays due to the penetration that Kennard had created all year. That said, because I began writing my post-game story kind of with some of those broad strokes like that, because it is something that we will have to think about as we look ahead to 2025. I think you should have won this ball game. I think there's just many missed opportunities in this ball game that you let get away early on. You're in gimme field goal range. You go for it. The play was kind of there, but you're throwing a jump ball up to Boogie Huntley. No offense to Boogie Huntley, great athlete, but kind of hard to win a one-on-one matchup as a defensive lineman. And then Herrera misses a 40-yard field goal by a hair, like hits it off the upright. So then you go into halftime down 7-3, even though you kind of marched up and down the field a couple of different times in the first half. And then in the second half, I thought you did finally kind of get your legs under you. Maybe some of this is attributable to getting used to a new offensive coordinator, Mike Shula calling the plays for the first time all season.
I think the field too, not the box. That was a change.
Right. But I think eventually they did kind of settle into an offensive rhythm. But you have this pretty great sequence where you throw a jump pass touchdown to Josh Simon right after the Brett Bielema, Shane Beamer confrontation, which we'll get more into in just a second. So that kind of puts an exclamation point on that confrontation, right? You feel like you have a chance to have the momentum completely shift to you. A couple plays later, you get an interception from Jalen Kilgore over the middle. You hit a couple of good plays back to back right off the interception. It seems like you might go down, score another touchdown, kind of put a nail in the coffin of this game, or at least, put yourself in a position where you're up 2 scores late going into the fourth quarter or slightly.
And then Jordan Howell fumbles.
And then Jordan Howell fumbles, and you give Illinois life again. They go down, score a touchdown. That's another one of those stats that I thought was interesting. South Carolina caused 2 turnovers, but they scored 0 points off of those turnovers, whereas South Carolina only turned it over once, but Illinois scores a touchdown off of that 1 turnover. I think that was a big point too. But anyway, my point being, I think you had so many opportunities to win this game and you just let it slip away, really in a way that we haven't seen since Alabama, where it felt like throughout the back half of the season, in those key moments when you needed a play to happen, you were finding a way to make it happen, and it just never came to fruition on Saturday or Tuesday.
Yeah, like you said, you're missing a couple of your playmakers. Maybe your Rocket Sanders can make one of those plays. A Kyle Kennard can make one on defense. But yeah, it's even in spite of everything, like you said, you've got the ball. I guess it was 1st and 10 at the 13 for Illinois there with 4 minutes to go. You can't really run the ball. You get down to a 4th and 4 situation from the 7. The play's there, and it's a shame that this is going to be his last offensive snap of the year and career for Simon. Because Sellers had a hell of a year, but he kind of missed him. He threw the ball behind him. Simon was open. He forced Simon to kind of reach back for the ball. It was a tough catch. He couldn't make it. And who knows if you win? I think there's something to be said for how tired that defense was for South Carolina at that point. Like, I think even if you go up 24-21 with 3 minutes left, you don't necessarily win the game. You still have to get a stop or at least hold them to a field goal to force overtime. But I don't know. It is a disappointing way to end because I do feel like they probably had the better balance of play overall. And even you didn't even mention it yet, but first drive of the game, you got down in the red zone and kicked the field goal. You had the momentum. Brian Thomas Jr. gets a big sack on 3rd down, short punt. You drive down to the 15 or whatever it was, and you stall out. And that's, who knows how a game goes if you start up 7-0 and not 3-0 there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was also struck by Illinois' poise, and maybe this is a good way to transition into the Bielema Beamer, controversy or whatever. But they just seemed like a very even-keeled team. Even though I think if I'm matching up player to player, both rosters, I probably give the talent edge to South Carolina. Illinois just never panicked. Even when South Carolina felt like they did get some momentum at different points. Like you said, the game started and it kind of felt like South Carolina had a chance to almost like take it in a dominant fashion early on with the way that you get a quick 3 and out and then you drive right down the field. But it just never played out that way. It never felt like South Carolina fully got the grip on it. And I do give Illinois' poise credit for that because they just never seemed like they panicked at all. What did you make of the whole Bielema Beamer thing. Let me really quick, I guess, explain it for people if somehow you were hiding under a rock and you missed it. Basically,
quotes while you're doing that.
Yeah. Basically, during the midst of the game, there is a rule where if the offense substitutes, the defense has an opportunity to substitute as well. Usually, this is like a 3 to 5 second sort of transition. But Bielema must have seen something on film. The only time I can think of this happening earlier in the year is like Ole Miss. And there's another aspect of that too that we'll talk about in a second. But anyway, he must have saw this on film or whatever. He has his defense substitute anytime South Carolina's offense substitutes, but he has them do it really, really slowly, to the point that South Carolina took a couple delay of game penalties, had to call some timeouts unnecessarily because the play clock was getting down to 0. Now the announcers seem to think the refs should have done a better job of policing that, or just getting out of the way and letting South Carolina snap it, whether Illinois was fully set or not. There was a sequence that they showed on the broadcast where it took like 14 or 15 seconds for Illinois to substitute, which is, I mean, obviously on a 25-second game clock is a significant amount. So anyway, this is going on all game. Beamer's getting very upset about it with the refs, getting very animated about it. And then you mentioned it earlier, but Sellers hits Del'Von Campbell for about 60 yards. A Illinois player gets injured near the South Carolina sideline. Bielema comes to check on his player. And in the midst of going over to check on his player, he puts up his hands like a substitution symbol.
So that's actually not what it was.
Okay.
What it was is, so on the, I don't know if you saw this, on the throw, the South Carolina, the right before the deep pass to Campbell, they try to throw back on the kickoff. They put Juju McDowell and Nick Harbor in the end zone. Juju McDowell makes this signal, the T-bar, which usually means ball's over my head, I'm not going to return it. You're allowed to do that. This is something Shane clarified with us post game, and I'll read the quotes in a second. You're allowed to do that as long as you're not waving your arms like a fair catch. Illinois and Bielema was upset because when you go like this, it's kind of an unspoken thing that the players all stop. And that obviously can be dangerous when 11 guys stop and start on a dime on a kickoff, just, ACLs, knees, that kind of thing.
Right.
So Bielema was actually making the T-bar motion, not the substitution, which I had that wrong until Beamer clarified it because they looked the same.
Yeah.
So that's actually what it was. And then I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
no, you're good. But still, Beamer was heated prior to that because of the substitution.
Yes, the substitution was also part of the frustration, I'm sure.
So then they don't flag Bielema for taunting, which regardless of what his intent was with the signal or whatever.
It was a taunt.
It was a taunt. Yeah, you're right beside the sidelines. If a player does that in that situation, they're almost certainly calling a flag for taunting.
Especially that far away from his sideline.
Yeah. And then, of course, Beamer freaks out, has to be pulled back by some of his assistants. And then South Carolina scores a couple plays later. So there's kind of like this momentum swing in South Carolina's directions. You feel justified because of, Bielema kind of, being a jerk or whatever. But obviously South Carolina goes on to lose the game. And is there any argument to be made that, like, in that situation, Beamer / the team kind of lost their poise to a degree that it was harmful to the way that the rest of the game played out? Or was it just like, a moment that we can kind of just skirt past and it didn't really affect the outcome?
I don't know if it changed the outcome, but I don't think you can skirt past it. I think, you kind of hit on it before we started talking about it, that one team kept their poise and the other one didn't. And maybe that's where you really wish you had a Rocket Sanders or Kyle Kennard or one of those extra seniors out there not just like having seniors in the sideline, but on the field to kind of steady the ship in a moment like that. But yeah, I definitely think there was frustration. And look, it comes from the top. And like, I understand both sides of that. I can understand Shane Beamer's upset because they didn't do anything that was against the rules, technically. Brett Bielema was upset because even if it's not in the rule book, it's still not really safe and it's not great for his players. So like, I have an issue a bit with the taunt and the not checking on your player who's hurt so that you can tell Shane Beamer that he tried to hurt your players kind of thing. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I understand why Bielema was upset, even if I don't think I would have reacted that way. And I understand why Shane was upset because, and I'll go ahead and read the quote here because he was talking about the whole T-bar thing. See, it's heated and competitive out here. But in all my years of being around football, I've never seen an opposing head coach come over to the opposing team's sideline and basically make a gesture towards the opposing head coach. I think he was upset about something that we did on the kickoff return in regards to Juju on the throwback to Nick. I would say he needs to check the rule book because that's something that we cleared with the officials before the game. It was disappointing. So I get it both ways. Like I said, I think Shane's has a right to be upset about Bielema being upset because, as Shane said, at least I can't verify this. He told the officials before the game we're going to run that play, and the official said that's fine as long as you don't make a waving motion. It has to be the T-bar.
Yeah. Well, and like it's kind of ironic to me. Now, granted, we're in the South Carolina space, so maybe we're biased or whatever. It's kind of ironic to me that Bielema gets upset about a gamesmanship thing while he is actively participating in gamesmanship.
Yes, well, that's what I mean. The same thing at the end. Like he's upset that South Carolina did something that could have injured one of his players, which probably could have. While one of his players is injured for something else, who's down after 2 plays later.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other gamesmanship thing is it did seem like late when South Carolina was driving, there was a fake injury or two that Illinois did. Whatever. It's hard to necessarily say for sure that that's what happened, but I've seen some angles of your guy looking over and at the sideline and then taking a knee, which we obviously saw in the Ole Miss game as well. Either way, both teams operating within the rules, both teams kind of pushing the rules a little bit. But I do think the difference is it clearly got under Beamer's skin, got under the team skin. If you go down and win, then cool. That's like a exclamation point that you beat them despite them, doing something unethical in your mind. But if the intent was to throw you off your game a little bit, I would say Bielema and Illinois are kind of successful in that particular realm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it's the reason they lost the game. There was, like you said, I actually give South Carolina a little bit of credit for right after that, they go down and still score on that drive. They hit Simon on the pop pass, like you said. That was the only time all day they got a touchdown in the red zone. So maybe that did fire them up. I don't know. But it was just weird because, you had the whole, was it a substitution sign? Was it a T-bar sign? I didn't even see it at first period because it was the opposite end of the field from where we were. It was obviously down by the South Carolina sideline, so I'm not sure if a lot of the Illinois players even saw what happened until obviously, South Carolina starts reacting and then players just kind of both come out. Just kind of a bizarre. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that in a football game, especially not a rivalry game. Like it's not South Carolina Clemson. Like you wouldn't have thought that was coming in a bowl game. Very strange.
Yeah, I mean, entertaining for sure.
Yeah.
both teams definitely wanted to get their 10th win, and obviously South Carolina came up short there. All right, let's look ahead a little bit, and I'm going to give you a little bit of
before we do that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We got to talk about Nick Eamon-Worry while we're here.
Yes, true.
Nick Eamon-Worry, for those I guess you probably saw by now, plays the first half, pretty much every snap. Did not appear to be injured. Anything like that. Doesn't play the second half. Gets sent. He's on the sideline holding his helmet the first 2 or 3 drives the second half, and then gets sent back to the locker room and doesn't come back out the rest of the game. Peyton Williams plays for him. Beamer just said they weren't going to discuss that internal team matter. Eamon-Worry told, I think it was David Cloninger in the Post-Courier. Yeah. So that he told the coaches before the game that was going to happen. I have an impossible time believing that. I don't want to call Nick a liar, but everything we've ever heard about Shane Beamer in 4 years is he's a year in or year out kind of guy. That's why it was such a big deal when Robbie Ashford was allowed to be with the team. Rocket and Kennard didn't even travel because, you opted out, you're not here. Like, I have an impossible time believing that Shane Beamer would have let Nick Eamon-Worry play if he knew he only wanted to play for a half. But I can't prove that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that that would have been pre-approved. I don't want to speculate too much because we don't have all of the facts, but it seems like something must have happened at halftime that they disagreed about. And did you say what Beamer said about it after the game? Basically, that it was a
Literally,
internal
just I
team
asked him, and
matter.
you can look it up. It was like a forward quote, or it's an internal team matter. Not going to discuss it. That was the whole answer.
Yeah, exactly.
He was annoyed.
Which
I mean, he was pissed. Like you could see it. I mean, I don't know if you looked at the video. It kind of went viral on social media, but he was. I don't think mad at me for asking the question, but like he was clearly annoyed with Nick and kind of the way that went down.
yeah, and that's the part that definitely makes me believe that something must have happened in the moment.
Yeah,
Kind of sad, I think, because Eamon Mori obviously has been a huge part of this team for the last 3 years. Great story, in-state kid, kind of like all the things that you hope for when you find your in-state diamond in the rough that you develop into a NFL first round pick or whatever, or second round pick or whatever he's going to be. Um, so kind of a sad ending, I guess, to his career. I do think with time, especially if he goes on to perform in the NFL and all of that, like it'll probably all be forgiven and he'll still be looked at as a great Gamecock or whatever. But
yeah.
um, not the way you'd like to end a great career here, though.
I just uh, question it from his perspective. Like, I understand you can get injured at any point. I think this is different than the Cam Ward situation where he did the same thing 4 days earlier in Miami's bowl game because he was going for a record, which he set before halftime. He's playing quarterbacks. There's someone trying to hit him on every single play, not safety. Um, and it sounded like that was discussed with Mario Cristobal and that staff before the game about the record and kind of what that would do. Does this help Nick when he's sitting across from an NFL GM at the combine in 7 weeks? Is this not going to be brought up? Like, is an NFL GM not going to call Shane Beamer about this? Like,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, yes, you preserved your health for 2 more quarters, which there's something to be said for that, right? Like maybe
yeah,
you can't say that he wouldn't have gotten injured or whatever.
yeah,
But did you ding yourself character wise or whatever? Again, from everything we know about him, this isn't like it was kind of out of character, I guess. But still, it's the last impression that you're leaving
yep.
on people that are making the decision for what's going to happen to you next. Maybe they smooth it over. Maybe he has a pro day with South Carolina or something, and they can, find a way to get back on good terms before
Yeah.
that actually comes to fruition. But it seems like maybe both sides are not particularly happy with one another at the moment.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Speaking of that, I think now we can start to kind of look at 2025 and what that's going to look like. Now that I think we've hit everything from the actual football game itself, unless you had something else.
No, that's good. All right, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of a amalgamation of some of the things that we've seen on our message board on GamecockScoop.com in the days following the game. Really, at times in the midst of the live chat that we were having, and give you like the doomer scenario for 2025. And I want you to kind of talk me off the ledge here. So heading into the bowl game, I think vibes were pretty high all around throughout December, right? You kind of signed several people to NIL deals that you want back. You get Dylan Stewart back. You get Lenore Sellers back. You get Nick Harbor back. We get the news that maybe Ben Martin Scott's going to have an extra year of eligibility. We still don't know exactly how that's all going to play out, but that's another positive. You get a couple of portal additions that I think could be potentially helpful. Air Noland is an interesting one, although obviously probably more of a year away. You get a couple of offensive linemen that you think can help with your depth. You get some intriguing defensive linemen, Gabriel Brown-Lodindi, Jalen Brown. You get a linebacker in Sean Murphy out of Florida State. So you're feeling kind of okay with where all that is. But then the game happens. And in the game, you see Mike Shula as an offensive coordinator for the very first time. And the offense probably looks the worst it's looked in 7 games. Fair.
Yeah.
You see Oscar Attaway and Jawarn Howell step in for Rocket Sanders. And while I think that they still have some upside, especially Howell had some nice runs and Attaway had a long touchdown run too. But anyway, it's not quite as efficient as it was when Rocket Sanders was there. You see Lenore Sellers show human side after being Superman for the last 6 games. Post game, you see Eamon Warry say that you find out Eamon Warry's declaring for the draft. TJ Sanders says he's declaring for the draft. There's a ton on defense that is not going to be back next year. You already saw in the bowl game the impact of not having Kyle Kennard on the other edge. So I think all of that good feeling post Clemson win, not all of it, a lot of it might have evaporated on Tuesday in a bunch of ways. Now, this could be just like a product of the moment. And again, I don't really believe all this, but I'm channeling some of the concerns that I've seen mentioned. How much of that matters as we look ahead to 2025?
All of it matters. All of it's part of the puzzle here. Just pieces to what this thing's going to look like next year. I don't take the same negativity from the bowl game because I think we already knew a lot of this. Like, we knew, taking aside what happened in the second half, we knew Eamon Warry was probably gone. We knew Sanders was probably gone. We knew for a fact that Boogie, Tonka, Kennard, D Knight, Debo, Fortune, those guys are out of eligibility. So you knew they were gone no matter what. So that didn't really change for me. I think there is a fair question and stuff we've talked about on this podcast and, in written form at GamecockScoop.com, just about how are you actually going to make this work next year on defense? Like, what does that actually look like just in terms of scheme and not scheme, because that's going to stay the same mostly, but piecing it together and just doing it with, let's call it what it is, probably a less talented group next year, and definitely without question, a less experienced group. That being said, if we're trying to work backwards here, back into, kind of a place of positivity, I think you still have your anchors back. You think about a D-line anchor, Dylan Stewart, okay, a safety anchor. You're going to have DQ Smith back next year for his senior season. A linebacker, I don't know if you can call Fred Johnson an anchor yet, but he played very well, was spoken of very highly down the stretch. He's wearing the green dot there for a little bit, kind of a leader on that defense when he was in games. You're going to have Judge Collier at corner. You're going to have Jalen Kilgore back at nickel. Like, I think there's more here. And I understand you win and lose up front. It's tip of the sword. D-lines everyone's going to focus on. But I think there's more on the back end than people are realizing or thinking that you feel good about. Bakari Swain back there. Got Miles Norwood in the portal from Ball State. So I think your secondary is actually in okay shape. And there's no way around it. You're probably not going to end the year with 44 sacks or whatever South Carolina did this year with next year. It's just probably not going to happen. But I think you can still have a pretty good defensive line. And then as for the offense, you have Lenore Sellers back, and that's the biggest thing, right? There is no quarterback question whatsoever, and that alone puts you ahead of a lot of teams. I guess would be my optimism. And then, yeah, it's going to have to look a little different. But, okay, am I crazy for not hating what you have in the receiver room? Mazio and Nick Harbor back, kind of your 1-2. Vandravius Jacobs, that's going to be in there too. Jared Brown has one more year. You've got, at this exact moment we're recording, you have 5 freshmen in your class. Donovan Murph, probably going to make it 6 here in about an hour at the Under Armour All-American game. Like, I think you can still have a good offense. You just can't have the same offense. It's going to have to be the efficiency you showed in the running game through the air. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually think you're set up to be better overall on offense, but you might take a step back at the running back position. Now, with what we saw in the bowl game, do you think that that's a position that they still might target in the spring portal period? Or do you think that you have enough in that room already? Is kind of a big question left. I mean, I thought you saw some good things from Attaway and Howell, but obviously not to the Rocket Sanders level.
I think they'll look around for sure. You always talk about, increasing depth and talent. I also don't know who you're going to find in the spring portal that's significantly better than Oscar Attaway, Jordan Howell, Matthew Fuller. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I do think you can still make that work. So I think basically what we're looking at is just a little bit of a different way to win next year. I think you're going to have to score more points. And I do think that it's understandable if you have a little concern that South Carolina had one of its worst offensive efforts of the season under Mike Shula. But I also think the final score is a little bit deceiving for how good the offense actually was. You put up a good amount of yards. You just didn't finish those drives, and that is a cause for concern. But you have a lot of time to figure that out. As far as the defense goes, I think you can be solid on defense, and I think that's kind of what you were getting at. We look at the interior. Obviously, you're going to miss that core group that's been here for a long time, but we think Nick Barrett should be back. Got a red shirt. We think Monkel Goodwine should be back. You already added Gabriel Brownlow Dindy, who's a former 4-star, 5-star, depending on the service, from Texas A&M. Hasn't made an impact yet, but that's a depth piece that seems to have some talent. You're bringing in a pretty good group of freshmen. You're bringing in a Zay Hardy, who is a JUCO transfer, so he's a little bit ahead of the game compared to a normal freshman. And then on the outside, as far as I know, we think Brian Thomas Jr. is back. He had a sack in the bowl game. So
Jatius Gear,
right? None of those guys are Kyle Kennard. But can they be solid enough? And I think that they were solid enough for you to win that game, even this past Tuesday. It just you didn't finish it on offense or whatever. But I think defensively you feel all right. Linebacker definitely going to take a step back just from an experience standpoint, but I do think you like your talent there. If you could get Ben Martin Scott back, if that waiver were to get cleared, I think you feel even better with that room. So yeah, I mean, I think you probably take half a step back on defense and half a step forward on offense.
Yeah.
And that might be enough to end up with a season that you're happy with. But I mean, we saw how many close games there were in this past year. The margin's still going to be thin.
Yeah.
You still need to find a way to finish games, which of course they didn't do on Tuesday.
Here's maybe where I would put it. And I understand how quickly this changes, that, every conversation we're having right now is completely different than it was 365 days ago. You think back to, kind of how quick Beamer changed the vibes in a good way. That you went from 2 wins to 7 in a calendar year. But here's my question I put to you that I was thinking about a lot and wrote a little bit about. From a 30,000-foot level, just looking back, everything that goes into a football program, head coaching, staffing, recruiting, talent, NIL, fan buy-in, administrative vision with a new AD, just anything that goes into the machine of a football program. South Carolina's program is the healthiest it's been right now since probably 2013, just at this exact moment. Not just because they won 9 games, it's the overall machine of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's accurate. The only concern you might have is Beamer's still sort of on the Will Muschamp track as far as record goes. I believe it was around 3rd or 4th season that he had his 9-win season as well.
It was his 3rd, yeah.
You felt like you're on the precipice of the next step, and then obviously things start to roll back downhill from there. I think the biggest question heading into next year is just how much you're going to miss all of that veteran talent on defense. But obviously, I think at this point you trust your defensive coaches to get the best guys out there, to put them in the best position. And we've kind of seen that even, the past couple of years when that you basically had the same personnel plus or minus Kyle Kennard or the linebackers you brought in this past offseason. They still were solid, right? Like there's been very few times where you felt like the defense was a detriment to you winning the football game. maybe a couple. So I don't know if you, as long as you can continue that, as long as you trust that Torian Gray has been recruiting and developing as well as he has through his whole career. Same with why can't I think of the defensive line coach's name right now?
Travian Robertson.
Travian Robertson and the
Sterling
edges
Lucas.
and Sterling Lucas both have kind of proven themselves up to this point, I think. So yeah, I think that there's a narrative that you can spin that you're going to maybe not fully reload, but not take a huge step backwards. And yeah, I mean, the recruiting classes that you've stacked over the last 3 cycles are really, really good. It seems like culture wise, you're kind of, you have, I think I saw someone mention this in the post game. You can maybe remind me who it was, but culture wise, you have the most buy-in that you've had throughout all these
Josh
seasons.
Simon just was talking about how different the buy-in was when he first got here 2 years ago versus now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's true. I think you can see that. So far, this has been the least injurious portal period under the Beamer era as far as your defections.
Oh yeah, you did lose Peyton Mangrum today. We forgot to mention that. Just not that changes the roster outlook a lot. Just that's a note we hadn't covered yet.
So anyway, I definitely can buy into they're in the best place that they could be, but I do think it's precarious. I guess
Yes.
is a way to put it. I do think that goodwill could disintegrate faster than you think.
Yeah, I don't even think that's a South Carolina specific thing, though. I just think that's modern college football and how quickly things go. And look, Florida State was 12-0 at this time last year. They went 2-10. That's just the reality of it. But I can't sit here and say what it's going to look like at the end of 2025. I just think right now, with the body of work in 2024, both on the field, in the building, behind the scenes, it's probably healthier than it's been since you had it rolling with Spurrier there, 2012, 2013.
All right, one last impression before we get out of here. People remember the 2024 season as, and fill in the blank.
Man, that's hard. People remember 2024 as a step forward and a year you beat Clemson in dramatic fashion. Because I think it always comes back to that in a lot of ways. That, and I think they remember this defense. Just defenses like this just don't come along often in college football. I don't know which that would fit, like the syntax of your sentence, like as an amazing defense or whatever. But
yeah,
I think it's the defense, the step forward, and the way the Clemson game ended.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is the emergence of Lenore Sellers.
Yeah.
I mean, pre-game, during the bowl game, the announcers were talking about his 2025 Heisman hopes.
Yeah.
And I think he will be on some of those early watch lists, mostly for what he did in those final couple weeks, Missouri, Clemson on a national stage, earlier in the season, Texas A&M, those sort of statement games that he made. I mean, even in a loss to Alabama, I think, he pretty quickly started to show that he was a force to be reckoned with. To me, the way I would fill in the sentence, and I think Beamer said something similar actually in the post game, somewhat depends on where they go from here. Is this a stepping stone towards something even greater, or is this an outlier? And I think, only time will tell there. If you had to ask me my gut, I'm maybe like 60% stepping stone. I do think there's a lot set up for the future here. But there's some significant questions that they're going to have to answer between now and August.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, Shane walked in there and said, we play Virginia Tech in 243 days and have to get a lot better, which sounds funny to hear a coach say that 5 minutes after losing a bowl game. But I think that's true. I mean, there's just a lot of questions to answer between now and week 1.
Yeah, definitely. All right. We will be back here probably about once a week through the off season to keep you caught up on everything that's going on with the football program. We'll also have a lot more focus on basketball in the coming weeks. Women are playing tonight. Men open up SEC play on Saturday. Both have done enough in non-con play, I would say, to set themselves up well for conference play. Obviously, the women are the question is, do they win the conference? Of course. So the expectation's a little higher there, but men, I think, have set themselves up to, if they can go around 500 in conference, be in the tournament conversation. We'll talk a lot more about that as some of those games start to play out. Make sure you check out our stuff on GamecockScoop.com. We have plenty of written stuff about the bowl game, and we'll have plenty of coverage of basketball in the coming days. We'll find out what Donovan Murphy announces here in a couple of hours at the Under Armour All-American game, which is one of the last pieces for the 2025 recruiting class before we turn our attention to 2026. So yeah, great time to go check out our stuff over there. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, have a happy new year, and